Thank you for coming, friends. This is a beautiful topic that we're going to discuss this evening. Kriya Yoga, the gateway to self-realization. You know, it was over 150 years ago that Babaji introduced, or really reintroduced into the world, this great science of Kriya Yoga. I say reintroduced because Kriya Yoga has been known since very, very ancient times. Krishna talked about it in the Gita. Others have talked about it and practiced it all the way through history. But as Yoganandaji wrote in the autobiography of a yogi, for many, many centuries, for over 2,000 years, this science of Kriya Yoga was basically lost to mankind. He said through the combination of priestly secrecy and man's ignorance, this science was unknown to the general population. And so, as the world has been evolving, the time has come for the reintroduction of this great science. Yogananda called it the jet airplane pathway to God, as opposed to more outer expressions of religion or outer worship, which he called the bullock cart to God. And so this path of Kriya Yoga is very, very efficient and is designed for the life that we all live. In the autobiography of a yogi, it says that Babaji was very well aware of the trends of consciousness that modern man would face. And these trends we see all around us. The restlessness that we see, also combined with the expansion that we see, the two go hand in hand. You know, 100 or 200 years ago, life was perhaps harder, but it was certainly much more simple. Right now, most of you have a mobile, and that mobile makes you available all around the world, to people all around the world, on a 24-hour-a-day basis, unless you turn it off at night. And so the restlessness of modern society was very well known to Babaji. After all, what is Babaji? Babaji is simply a condensation of the divine consciousness, but combined with the intelligence, the great power that he had. But he came to bring this science out of basically compassion to all of us. God is always compassionate. God is always acting in our behalf, on behalf of helping us to become happy. One time, a person came to Yoganandaji, and he said, basically to Yogananda, he had a long list of questions, and he was a very, very intellectual person. And he read off his first question, and Yogananda looked at him and said simply, "Love God." And the man thought, well, he must not have understood the depth of my question. So he read off his second question, and Yogananda looked at him and said, "Love God." And the man thought, well, this man is a little dense, I'd better read my third question. So he read his third question. Yogananda looked at him and said, "Love God," and got up and walked out of the room. And that man never did quite understand. Years later, he wrote about that incident, saying that Yogananda didn't seem to be able to understand his questions. Well, the divine understands us. The divine knows us from the inside out. The divine is always acting on our behalf, out of compassion, out of love. I heard a beautiful story concerning the great saint Anandamoyi Ma, great woman Bengali saint of this last century. She passed away in the late 1980s and was followed by hundreds of thousands of people. This was a story about a man who had just become a follower of hers. But like this man that was intellectual and doubted Yogananda, thought he couldn't understand, this young man didn't understand why Anandamoyi Ma was so completely restless. He was around her for a little while, and he noticed that she would travel here, she would stay there for a couple of days, then she would get up and travel somewhere else. And even though she had many ashrams around, she rarely stayed in any of those ashrams for very long at a time. And one day, Anandamoyi Ma said that they were going to go on a little trip to a place that had a beautiful lake, and asked this young man to come along with her. And so he was happy to go along, but again, the doubt was in his mind. Why is she just running around, running here and thither and yon? And they arrived at this place, and the day after, she said, "Come, I want to have a picnic, and we'll walk to this lake, and we'll have a picnic there. So prepare some food." So they prepared the food. They had a basket that they carried along with them. And they walked some distance to get to this lake. They sat down. They spread some blankets on the ground to sit on. They opened the food hamper. They took out the food and the plates. They set it on the blanket, all ready to eat. And Ma stood up and said, "We're leaving." And this young man especially thought, what in the world? Can't she sit still even long enough so that I can have my meal? I mean, that was what was behind it, let's face it. Can't she sit still long enough so I can eat? And she walked a little distance, and there was a young boy beside her, and then she stopped under a tree. And out of that tree, a little bird fell down onto the ground. And she asked the young man, "Please pick it up and hold it up in front of me." And he did so. And she looked deeply into the eyes of that little bird for about a minute. And then it fluttered its wings and it died. And she explained to the group, the reason that we came here was because I could hear, I could feel the soul of that bird calling to me. And I was here in order to help it move on into its next life. Now, if the divine has so much compassion that it cares about a little bird, what does that mean for us? It means that the divine is caring about us deeply, caring about our happiness especially. As you heard, Yogananda said that everyone in the world is driven by two twin desires. One is the desire to be happy, and the other is the desire to avoid pain. So everything you do, if you could just pull back just that much, it's a good practice to pull back a little bit every evening before you go to sleep and look through the day and ask yourself this simple question. As you review the day, ask about each episode or each thing that you did. Did that make me happy? Is that going to lead to my greater happiness? Or was I acting in some way that I made someone else unhappy and ultimately will make myself unhappy? It's very good to review, because ultimately the real motivation for what you do in life, everything you do in life, is to find happiness. If you want to be, as Sri Kartikeyanji said, if you want to seek wealth, why would you want to seek wealth? There was a story of someone who was had done a lot of tapasya and was about to die, and an angel came and said, well, you've done so much tapasya that I'm going to give a special boon to you and take you up bodily to heaven, and you can take something with you if you want. And so he said, oh yes, I would like to take a backpack full of gold bars with me. The angel said, well, all right if you want to, but I don't know why you would want to take paving stones with you. And so the weight on our backpack of wealth is really just paving stones that we pave the streets of our life with. Why do we think we need them? Because in our hearts we're a little insecure. We don't know what will happen. We don't have sufficient faith that God will take care of us. But if we had sufficient faith in Divine Mother or in God, then that faith itself is much more valuable than any amount of gold that we could accumulate. The great, great saints, they don't carry money with them. Yogananda had a little box, and he kept a few dollar bills in there and a few coins, and he would give that to his disciples, maybe to get some ice cream. Our master, Swami Kriyananda, had, and we have a little museum of things that were sacred to him. And we have the first dollar that Yoganandaji ever gave to him. And one day, Yogananda called, it was a hot day in Los Angeles, Yogananda called the young men to him, and he gave each of them $1 to go and get some ice cream because it was hot and it was a little treat for them. And they said, oh, no, Master, we don't want to take your money. And he just said simply, I don't keep money, I can't keep money, here, you take it. And so they took that $1, and Swami traded it out for another $1 that he had and kept that because it was sacred to him. Not so much the value of the dollar bill, it didn't have value in that way, but it was a reminder of God's love and compassion and how God will take care of us. And so all the things that we seek, money, power, possessions, cars, all of those things have the one purpose behind them that we think this will make us happy. So again, I ask, at the end of each day, review the day and see, did this activity, did this interaction, did that make me happy? Because that's what you're after. Now, the key to happiness is, in this sense, our very greatest treasure. So imagine that you had a safe that operated with a key, and in that you had the most valuable thing and things that you can imagine. And you put that key away one day in your breast pocket, and then later on you forgot where you had put that key. And so you began to search your house, you couldn't find it. You thought, maybe I left it somewhere in a store, maybe it dropped out of my pocket. So you've searched the stores, all the stores that you've ever been in, because this is a very, very valuable key. You look everywhere. And finally one day you put on that shirt again. There's the key right next to my heart. That's where I put it, right next to my heart. Now the key to happiness is not next to your heart. It's in your heart. It's within us. And so we can search the whole world. And we can try to substitute anything that we can find. But the key to happiness is in your own heart. And it's the compassion of these great masters that gives us a technique and a spiritual path that can not only help us realize that happiness is within, but helps us find that happiness. How does Kriya Yoga work? What is Kriya Yoga? Well, Kriya Yoga is, in essence, a technique that controls our life force. So the great teachings of India, and by the way, India is the guru for the whole world. One of the reasons that Yogananda Ji went to the West and took this great path of Kriya Yoga is that it is destined and has already spread all around the world. Even from Ananda Sangha, we have centers and meditation groups and disciples in every continent on the planet, every country virtually. Our website, one time a couple of years ago, somebody counted the number of countries that people had come to the website to get these teachings. They came up with 202 countries. I didn't know the planet had 202 countries, but see, these teachings are available now all around the world, but that's partly because Yogananda Ji brought them to America, and from America, new ideas are spreading around the world. But let's always remember that the depth and roots of these teachings are rooted in ancient India. India is now and has always been the guru of the world because it understands these sacred teachings that happiness lies within, that our very nature is happiness beyond happiness. Happiness generally is we're happy when life gives us what we want, and we're unhappy when life gives us what we don't want. But the ancient teachings of India said, get rid of your wants and don't wants, your likes and dislikes, and then you not only live in happiness, you live in bliss. Our very nature is Sat Chidanandam. Consciousness, existence, consciousness, and bliss. Our very nature is bliss. And Yogananda further defined that as ever new, ever expanding bliss. And it's that consciousness that we came from. And it's that consciousness that we are seeking again. That's the key that we're looking for. That's the key that is inside of us. And it is not only just in our heart, certainly not the physical heart. Lots of operations have been done by doctors, and they've never found any key in someone's heart that works for a great vault. But in the heart of our likes and dislikes, see, our astral spine is where these things reside. And in the center near our heart, in yogic teachings, that's called the Anahat Chakra. And the Anahat Chakra is the center of our likes and our dislikes, of our feeling nature. And we're constantly interacting with the world according to our feelings. I like this, I don't like that. It's a little too cool in here. I wish they would warm it up. No, it's a little too hot in here. This seat is a little too soft. No, I've just been sitting here too long. It's a little too hard. We're always running a little tape beneath the consciousness, under the waves of our mind, a little tape. I like this, I don't like this. I like this, I don't like this. And it rules our life, and in fact it ruins our life. Because if we seek that key to happiness, the key to bliss, the key to joy outside of ourselves, when it lies within ourselves, we're destined never to find it. And so, if we try to be happy by arranging things in the world, possessions or people, if only people would act the way that I want them to act, then I would be happy. How many people live their lives with that kind of a delusion and are constantly trying to correct everyone around them? I'm sure you know people like that. If only everybody would behave the way I want them, then I would be happy. Well, even if they behaved, even if life was absolutely perfect, just the way you wanted it. You know what Yogananda said? You would very quickly get bored. You know, in the West, they depict angels as sitting on clouds playing harp music. Now, the reason that they depict these various sounds, Krishna's flute, a bell, church bells, harp music, so on, are because those are the inner sounds that one hears in deep meditation. But when we go up to heaven, we're supposed to see the angels playing harp music. Well, imagine you go up to heaven one day and you see the angels playing harp music and you think, that is the most beautiful music I have ever heard. It's beyond anything in the earthly realms. It's so beautiful. And they go on playing, and the next day they're still playing, and you're saying, oh, it's still really quite beautiful. And about 2 weeks later, they're still playing their harps, and you're beginning to say, isn't there anything else going on up here in heaven? Is it only harp music? And then maybe somebody comes and says, oh, you thought you were in heaven? You're destined to hear this harp music for the eternity. You're in hell. See, we get bored even with things that we enjoy. And we seek something else. And so, as long as we seek outside of ourselves, we can never get to the state that we're really after, which is self-realization, to realize back again who we really are. We're one with the entire universe and beyond the universe. We're one with God who has created the universe, and we're just sparks. Sparks, or as Yogananda said, we're little cups of that great, vast ocean of consciousness. And we will never be happy until the little cup of our life, of our consciousness, is reunited with that ocean. And so that's what we're trying to do. But again, what is Kriya Yoga? Why does it help? It's because Kriya Yoga works on the principle that the consciousness that we have depends upon the flow of the inner energies, not outer conditions or outer possessions. It works on inner energies, and those inner energies are in the subtle spine, in the chakras and in the spine. So the prana, the flow of prana, is there within us. And if we could only control that prana, then we can control the conditions of our own consciousness. And if we can control our consciousness, all sorts of good things happen. We can control whether we're happy or whether we're not happy if we can control our consciousness. We can control our reactions. You know, most of the trouble that we get in and most of the distress that we feel during the day is because we are reacting to life around us. If someone cuts us off when we're driving and it doesn't seem right, our reaction is we're unhappy with that. We're angry. We're frustrated. And we make ourselves unhappy, and maybe we use our horn and try to make that other driver unhappy, but we're constantly reacting. Now, if we can control those reactions, this is another teaching of Kriya Yoga, because the power of Kriya Yoga, what Kriya Yoga does, is it's a technique of meditation and of control of prana, of a pranayama technique. And it gives us control over the energy And when we can control the inner energy, the prana, then we have control over our actions and our reactions. And when we can control our reactions to things, things don't upset us anymore. We're calm, we're peaceful, even in the face of something that we have, Nayaswami, Davidji, and I, and others from Ananda, we have taught thousands and thousands of people these techniques. For 50 years I've been teaching these techniques. So I've seen thousands of people, and I know that within 2 or 3 weeks of beginning to practice these techniques, people are already calmer, they're already happier, they're already less reactive. And when they are, then the world around them responds to that, because we're always in a magnetic exchange with people and things around us. There was many years ago, Swami Kriyananda was giving classes in these techniques, and during those classes he would sing some chants and some songs as we heard, and he had a little album, a little tape that had the beautiful chant Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram Om. And one of his students, a woman who was taking his classes, she began to get very calm and very kind, and she would play that tape constantly. And one time she had a little son about 3 years old, and one time she was chastising the son and she was very upset, and the little kid looked up at her and he said, Shri Ram, Jai Jai Ram Om, because he knew that hearing that music and doing the practices created a different mom than he was seeing when she was upset. And so these practices of Kriya Yoga will begin very, very quickly. Yogananda called it the jet airplane route. It begins very quickly to allow us to begin to take control over those inner energies, because that's ultimately what it is. Now, another thing that happens is that when we can control that energy, I don't know if you caught it in something that Swami said, but it is that thoughts are universally rooted. They aren't individual. So we don't create our own thoughts. We pick up on those thoughts from the vast divine consciousness. And looking through the distorted lens of our own mind, we distort those thoughts a little, but we don't create them. And so another thing that happens in the practice of meditation and of Kriya Yoga is that it changes the level of our consciousness, one might say the level of the dial of our radio, and we begin to pick up different thoughts. We begin to see the world in a more kindly way, in a more compassionate way. We begin to see if we aren't constantly feeling like we're under threat, when someone does something, maybe we see that it's not the right thing to have done, but it doesn't bother us. If you have been a smoker for a long time, and then you stop smoking, you still probably have a subconscious desire to have a cigarette. And if you see somebody else who is smoking, you will have a judgment about him. Oh, he's a terrible person. He shouldn't smoke. It's terrible. He's having smoke around me, and so on. You have that judgmental attitude. Isn't that right? But if you've long been a non-smoker and you don't have any residual desire for it, then you see someone smoking and you think, oh, that's not good for them. They shouldn't smoke. But you don't have that emotional engagement. And so as we begin to raise our consciousness and withdraw it, we don't have that emotional, judgmental, negative engagement with everything around us all the time. And so at the end of the day, a Kriya Yogi will review his day, and there won't be very many times in that day where he was very reactive or she was very reactive, because we're in control of that element in the heart and the feelings, and we aren't reactive. When I was only meditating about 5 years, this was in the early 1970s, they were just beginning to do scientific studies on meditation. And so at that time, they didn't have the sophisticated equipment that we have now, but they had the ability to monitor your brain waves. And so they asked different people to come to a laboratory, and they hooked you up with kind of a skull cap with all these electrodes on it. And then they asked you to meditate. And they said that when you were calm, you were supposed to press a little button. So the experimenter explained this. The person being experimented on thought that the whole experiment was about the depth of their meditation. But then, about 5 minutes into the session, the door to this laboratory opened, and this man came in and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that somebody was in here. I didn't know you were in here. I'm sorry, I'll leave now." And then he slammed the door on his way out. And what the real experiment was to watch the brain waves of people who had been meditating as opposed to people who had not been meditating. And generally speaking, within less than a minute, the brain waves of meditators returned back to being calm and in a meditative state. And those who hadn't, they were still 15 minutes later thinking about that rude fellow who had come in and why he shouldn't have disturbed me. And the mind was still running and running and running out of control. So Kriya Yoga begins to give you control over your own mind. And when you can control your own mind, you can also begin to have an influence on the people around you. We lived with Swami Kriyananda for 50 years. And when he would go into a store or into a room or anywhere, whether the person was unknown to him or a friend of his, he would treat everyone as if they were a friend and a long-term friend. And because of that, there was a magnetic aura around him that people responded to him in a friendly way. There's a magnetism, a law of magnetism, that says that like attracts like. Isn't that right in the law of magnetism? So that's true on a psychological basis. If you're friendly, you will attract friendliness. If you're unkind, you will attract unkindness. And so one of the secrets of Kriya Yoga is that it puts you in control of your own mind and your own behavior and allows you to begin to express those higher qualities that you want to express anywhere. I don't think anybody sitting in here doesn't wish that they were compassionate or kind or friendly. All of us have that because these are divine attitudes, divine qualities within us. So we all have that. But we don't have control over our minds, and we don't have control over our reactions, so that we can't express, even though we would like to, those qualities. Kriya Yoga helps you control your inner energies, your inner consciousness, and your inner reactions, so that you can be the kind of person that you want to be. In America, you don't have it in India, probably better that you don't. They have bumper stickers. And bumper stickers are little kind of stickers that you put on the back of your car. And sometimes they're, vote for this candidate, or my child was top student in his class, or things like that. At any rate, one time we were driving and I saw a bumper sticker that said, "I wish I were the kind of person my dog thinks I am." Because the dog always thinks that we're just wonderful. Well, see, Kriya Yoga begins to give us the power to control our behavior in such a way that we can be pleasing to our dog, live up to his expectations, and to the expectations of others. And I'll just end by saying one more thing about Kriya Yoga, and partly why it is such an important and powerful spiritual gift to mankind. All of our thought, it helps us burn up the seeds of karma. Every thought that you've had, these are the teachings of India. Every thought that you've had, every action, every word, every emotion, everything that you've ever done has sent out a wave of energy. And that energy is destined to return to you. And if you've had many, many episodes where you've been angry or violent, that anger and violence that you yourself have sent out is going to return to you. Because in this subtle spine, there are seeds of karma. And those seeds of karma have to be resolved. And so most of us are simply kind of being washed as if we're little flotsam on the sea of duality, and a wave comes and it pushes us that way, and another one pushes us, and we have no control over what happens to us. We have to live through our karma. But Kriya Yoga, in the deep practice, when we electrify the spine, the subtle spine I'm talking about, through the practice of Kriya Yoga, it burns up those seeds of karma, and we become released from them, and we become free. And so Kriya Yogis, as they practice Kriya Yoga more and more, you see them very, very free in their consciousness, very happy, generally speaking, in what happens, calm and peaceful and unable to be ruffled by life. And ultimately, they become, as Swami Kriyananda was in his latter years, they become blissful, filled with joy, filled with the bliss of their own self, their own self-realization. Toward the end of his life, Swami Kriyanandaji would often say to us, "I feel so much bliss, I can hardly stand it. I can't contain it." And the reason he was so kind and so loving is because he said, joy, it is the very nature of joy to want to share itself with others. And so Babaji, being the master of joy, was the instrument of God wanting to share that with all of us. And we are the recipients of that. And so this beautiful, wonderful gift that these great masters of India have brought into the world and spread throughout the world, the power of Kriya Yoga is, as Sri Kartikeyanji said, it is absolutely destined to spread and help uplift the lives of millions and millions of people.